Good evening. We'll give people a little bit of time to get on. I am Betsy Green, and we are happy that you're joining us for our first webinar. So we will get started in just a minute or two. We've got some attendees coming on. So I'm going to turn it over to Hugh Fletcher, our moderator for tonight, and go ahead and advance that slide.
Thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. This is the second part of the Artist in the Studio series featuring Michael Ewing. Tonight we have Michael live to answer questions, and we'll get to see some of the videos that we did in his studio a few months back. And then you can ask questions and Michael will respond to those. This project was started last fall in the midst of the COVID lockdown in order to provide current content to our members, to the FWA members, provide an intimate view to the artist's creative environment, a place where most people never would get to see, and provide the artist the opportunity to speak directly to their audience. And finally, a pet project of many of us, provide teaching materials to art teachers to help inspire the next generation of Western artists. Although many of you know Michael and have collected his works, I will add a few facts. Much of Michael's background is in the videos, along with his early history that are linked to from the FWA website. Michael is a past president of the FWA, and in 2005 was selected as the FWA Member Artist of the Year. He currently leads, importantly, the Scholarship Committee on the FWA board. This committee oversees grants to Southern Arizona schools, and last year these grants totaled almost $30,000. So it's really making a difference in the art programs for Southern Arizona schools. So let's get started. Here's the first video that we're going to see tonight, featuring Michael's work, Beside the Mountain Stream. Please do answer or ask questions in the Q&A and chat functions, and then we will answer those in order after we see the video. So let's roll Beside the Mountain Stream. Maybe. So Michael, this looks like a local scene.
This is, in the sense that it is from our area, our outside of Tucson, and it takes me back to when my first trip to the MO show. I was still living in Michigan, coaching basketball, and I had to fly out for the first time on an airplane to the show. And I met Jack Goodman at the show, and I asked Jack if there was somebody who could, I don't know, take me around to the ranches outside of Tucson. And he introduced me right away to a gentleman named Tom Hunt, who many people will remember. And Tom was a rancher, and he managed ranches out in Sonoyta. And we talked at the show a little bit, and then he invited me out the next day to visit him and took me on a tour of the San Rafael Valley. And we took some sandwiches out, and we took a break underneath a beautiful sycamore tree. And it was an opportunity that was too good to be true. I made several trips with Tom in that area after that, and we really enjoyed things. But he knew what I was after, what I had to learn. And you appreciate someone like that who will help you along the way. Both Jack Goodman and Tom were willing to do that at the time. And it was 1980 or so, just starting out as a painter. So then another opportunity comes along, and it happened with the Elkhorn Ranch. They, through a contact, invited me out to be an artist in residence for several years. And I stayed out there for my visits and stayed in a cabin. And that took me farther into the horse ranching life, learning things about the breeding of horses, watching the wranglers in casual moments, watching them around their horses, and then getting into the landscape out there. This ranch is at the base of the Babakaveri Mountains out towards Atlas. It's along the border, and it's a pretty stark landscape as you get down in the bottoms area here. But you get up and start climbing up into the mountains a little bit, and things change, and there's more water up there. And there are rocks like this. This was a beautiful rock that I found down in that area. And again, always wanted to paint it, but waited for the time that was right to work it into a composition. So this was a challenging composition and painting to do. Not only because of the landscape, it's pretty complicated, but you have 6 figures in this piece, and that's rare for me to challenge myself with so many figures. It doesn't happen that often. But I had the time again during this time that we're somewhat isolated, and so I decided to go for it. It's a challenge in terms of perspective. You have to try and get the figures out in front with the right proportions. You don't have a building here to set up the perspective and measure against, so you're kind of using your best judgment. The figures in the foreground here sort of represent the main focal point, and their horses off behind them here, behind some rocks, sort of set up a second focal point in this composition. But you can also see a lot of work being done in the foreground and around it to create some diagonal movement to create more depth. And the detail in the front here is just fun things to work with. Rocks are a riot to paint. You can use lots of palette and knife there if you want to on them. And this is the mountain range that is behind it up there, how they start as you get up into the mountains. Similar in a little regard to Sononoida there with the brush and that up there. And you're just creating depth as you go back. And the sky was a fun one to finally get right. I think it took me 3 tries, but it came into it here. The smoke on the fire is always fun to play around with. A variety of outfits on the Wranglers and cowboys in that, and a variety of hats is fun to get into. And the horses are always a great challenge to work with, a lot of fun. So again, opportunity, and you really learn to appreciate the people that are willing to jump into your life and help you along and teach you what you need to learn for this. Talking with Mary Miller one time, she was telling me about the horses that they breed out there. And let's see if I can remember our discussion, because she said they breed quarter horses, they breed thoroughbreds, and they breed percherons. And it's an interesting take, and they need all 3 of those horses because they all have different skills to get you through the rugged territory down there. And having done mostly quarter horses, it makes you appreciate the other breeds of horses and their special gifts that they can bring to our West out here.
Well, we have our first video clip, and I know that we've got some people that have some great questions for you. I always, while we wait for them to get into the box, the question about the horse's feet, because I have a couple of your paintings and I don't know that I have any horse's feet showing, so I'm going to start you off.
Well, it's always an interesting question to get with the hose. I think I see some there. I might have to put on my glasses, but you know, if you're dealing in a field or something like that, naturally things can cover up hooves and stuff with horses. You're talking about a pretty heavy animal. And even on, it depends, our ground out here is pretty hard, so sometimes if I'm doing them in front of a building, the hooks will show pretty well. But there are times when you're in softer sand in a wash or something where they might get hidden. And I also do a lot of snow scenes these days, and of course they're going to sink down into the snow a little bit. Not that I do it on purpose for that reason, but I love doing snow paintings and working with snow because up in Michigan we have a family farm and I get a lot of snow scenes and patterns in the snow from there. And also up in the mountains here, I used to be able to ski a little more, and that was always fun to get up in the White Mountains or up at Flagstaff and get pictures in snow up there.
So, Michael, we've got another question, and I think it relates to the authenticity of your horses. Did you ride horses growing up? And if not, how did you get horses so right?
Up in Michigan, I had some cousins and uncles who had a farm, and when I was really young, they'd set you up on a horse and things like that. My cousin Gina raised Morgan horses for show, so I was around them a little bit, believe it or not, in Michigan. But really, when I started painting, one of the things I used as a focal point early on was a wagon, an old Western wagon with flowers in it in front of a building. And it served its purpose really well for a focal point. But at the same time, I was drawing and painting horses. You find yourself out at quarter horse shows, out at the fairgrounds, or in the old days at Old Tucson, you could go to the college circuit, the junior college circuit for the rodeos. And there was not much security, so you could walk around anywhere you wanted to and just take pictures and get a feel for horses standing around and just putting yourself out there around horses and people riding them. And I always had friends that would take me on rides and things like that. Not that I ever became a master horseman or anything, but it did help. And then I'll say this, I remember Dan Bates and I met at Aileen and Jack Goodman's place before an MO. And we're about the same age. Our wives were pregnant at the same time. So we kind of hit it off. And our girls are still best friends. But I had done sculpture in art school, and we had a foundry. So I had done some bronze. And I just asked Dan to help me out doing a little wax figure, which I still have from way. I never cast it, but it was a way to study the anatomy of a horse, because that's what you do when you do a sculpture. You're laying sort of the armature becomes the bones, and then you start laying on the muscles and create the feel of the horse. So that really helped.
So, Michael, one potentially last question here that are tied together. You're early on, you decided to become an artist. You went to art school. And then you became from Michigan, you became a representational Western artist. So how did that happen? And who currently, or who are your masters, and which artists today influence your work greatly?
I knew people back in Michigan who had houses out and were familiar with Arizona and the art scene. And I can remember some of the first Western art pieces, maybe even a small painting of Ross Stefan's up in Michigan there, seeing that on a wall. And at the time, I may have even been experimenting with modern art and abstract expressionism. Who knows? Because I did a little bit of that too. Wasn't very good at it, I have to admit. But so I was getting some of the Southwest art magazines and looking at Tom Hill's work, which Tom did a lot of structures and a lot of colors, and I would just look at some of the artists that I saw there. Jim Reynolds was another guy that I really appreciated, probably because of the use of color. I thought I saw something in Western art that I hadn't seen before in representational art. I had studied Impressionism in art school, and this was just something new guys like Ken Riley, who did some wonderful things with composition and again, bright colors. So, and as I got on, guys like Cyrus Astry, Bill Anton is a contemporary of mine, and there's a lot of, Richard Schmid was somebody also. So there were quite a few artists that have influenced me, and you always study what's been done.
Well, Michael, thank you for those great answers to those good questions. We're going to go now to the next video from our interview a few months back. Very different Michael Ewing picture, but it's a very complicated picture and beautiful picture. So, Amy, if we can see the Home in America.
Michael, the last painting with the horse in the church is something we would all recognize, I believe, as a Michael Ewing painting. This one might take us by surprise.
This painting took 10 years before I got around to painting it. It hung around in my mind for that long. I knew I wanted to paint it someday, and it was just, like I may have said before, that the time was right to try something like this. It's not something I haven't done before. I've done structures and buildings, architectural pieces without figures, but I hadn't done it in a while. And because my technique and I guess you could say my style is evolving and hopefully improving, I wanted to test myself and see what would happen with a painting of a landscape and a building by itself without a figure in it. Figure usually works really well for a focal point, and there might be a focal point in this one around the flowers and the flag, but it's really a painting that I knew would come together if I just worked it the right way. It is up in Colorado. It's a house and the tree, the yellow tree on the right, that was the color that was there, and it surprised me so much. Finding a turquoise house like this to paint is probably pretty rare, that somebody might paint their house turquoise, but it was turquoise like this. What really sets it off for me, why I thought it would work so well, is the contrast with the cliff behind it, which was a challenge to paint and get the paint application the way I want it and the colors the way I want it. The sky in the background, working in purples and turquoise together there to give it both contrast and some continuity with the palette. And you create space with the distant mountain and the left there. I like the looseness of the brush stroke on it. There's still some of my glazing approach in the darker areas on the building. And these days I'm doing more impasto painting, which is a thicker paint application. And this one represents that pretty well. I like the looseness of the brush stroke and the varying brush strokes in the painting. So it took quite a bit of time. There's a lot of detail in the house because of the style of the house. It was a fun painting to do. I really enjoyed it. And when I feel like I'm happy with a painting, and a challenge, something that is new to challenge yourself with, it was very rewarding to do it.
Okay, as we wait for a question or two, I feel like this was from New England, misplaced. It looks like some of the houses I remember from grew up in New England.
You also have some, I know I've got images from Prescott of houses like this. And believe it or not, down in Tombstone, they might be a little simpler, but they pop up out west here quite often.
All right. Well, we've got the picture up there. And Hugh, you got one question there. Audience, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A.
So, Michael, let me ask you about the bunting. because these are beautiful turquoise green colors out of Colorado, and the slope of the house really corresponds to the slope of the mountain behind it. You've got the beautiful purple matched up with the green. But my eye on this one always comes to that bunting.
And I don't know if it was the 4th of July when I was up there. I don't remember why that red, white, and blue sort of flag was hanging there. But I was so impressed with the building, the structure, the landscape, the tree, and all that. The composition I knew would work. I think it almost took me starting the painting before I realized that bunting or was there. And again, with something like this, I don't think you necessarily even need a specific focal point, but boy, it sure was in a naturally good location for a focal point. So I painted it in, and it does call your attention.
So, Michael, on this particular painting, I'm going to give you 2 questions on this. Can you talk about some of the more difficult elements of this particular painting, things that maybe didn't work out as easily as you hoped? And did you ever consider doing this painting as a night scene, or have you done night scenes?
I've done a couple of night scenes. I think I remember Talakapaki up in Sedona doing a night scene courtyard, which I hadn't seen done very often. And I did a little campfire painting at I think, and put it in a show up in Greeley years ago. But I haven't done many night scenes. And as far as this one, that cliff behind it, and this image might be cropped a little bit too, but it took me a few tries to get. I actually had to put some blue into it to relate to the rest of the painting, and it took me a couple of tries to get the shapes right. And there are trees growing up that ridge too. But I really liked. I don't often do turquoise skies, but when you can do them, you go for it. And all those colors in the clouds, I wanted to do the purples, the blues, and the turquoise, and that was fun to pull off. The foreground is pretty simple, and there's some kind of looseness in the foreground right at the bottom, that when you're just blocking in color and playing with the paint a little bit, and you look at it and you think, okay, I'm going to leave it kind of left alone there, and then tighten it up as you go back towards the house. Now, I got to say, the structure itself, all those windows and doors and things like that, getting them straight and right in perspective, that took a lot of redrawing, I'll say, because you don't always nail it the first time, and you're constantly looking at it and adjusting your drawing.
Michael, this painting is in Settlers right now?
It is at that Settlers West Gallery.
And in terms of this beautiful Victorian home, the landscape, is the landscape authentic to the reality of the house, or was this artistic?
No, that house was sitting with that cliff behind it and that distant mountain there. Yep. I'll say the name of the town, but I don't know if I'll say it right. So you people from Colorado, don't laugh. I'm going to say it as Ewing, but it starts with an O, I think. And it's up there, I think, beyond Silverton and that area. There's a little loop you can travel on up in Colorado. Sort of in the western, getting up into central Colorado, up in the mountains, though. I think there are some hot springs there, too. I could be wrong.
Well, Michael, I think with this one, you have demonstrated your, I think, breadth as a painter from your, generally speaking, Western painting. And we're going to see a much more traditional Western Michael Ewing painting for our third and final video for the night. And it's called Impatient Pup. And some of our viewers may have seen this in the MO Art Show.
So, Michael, this is the last painting we're going to show tonight. And this painting looks much larger than most of the ones that we've seen you do in the past.
Yes, it is, for me, what I consider a larger painting. Other artists work a lot bigger than this, and I have in the past, but this is a good size for me to do these days.
Can you tell me a little bit about the subject matter? It looks like it's maybe northern New Mexico, Colorado?
This is in New Mexico. It is along the high road heading up from Santa Fe to Taos. It's sort of a back road. And there's a little community up there called Las Trampas. And this is right outside of that, heading up the mountain on the right side. And the day this time I was going through there, this is how it looked that day. It had really distinctive lighting with some shadows across the distant mountains there, and nice lighting on the structures. It was a good day to hit this place.
There also seems to be a lot of movement around the central figures of this painting.
So that's one of your basic design elements that challenges you. You want to have a focal point in the painting, and you want to sequence and move the eye around the canvas to come back to that focal point. So fortunately, in a landscape, you have a lot of places that you can do that, a lot of organic shapes. And in this particular piece, if you work the foreground, you kind of have a horizontal movement coming across here, and then it hits this corner, and you've got some grass bringing the eye up, and you could actually bring it back here through the focal point. Well, it's not the only way you can go. You can travel up this direction and follow the top of the mountains and hit the windmill and come back down. And then, like the organic shapes in the foreground, you can come up to clouds in a sky. You can always manipulate those so that you can bring the eye back around to the focal point. You can do 3 sequences like that in a painting this big.
Michael, can you talk a little bit about the grasses and the color in the foreground?
So I've been experimenting with paint application in these fields, and we basically, in oil painting, we do work dark to light. So if you lay down some darker colors to begin with, you can come over top of that with various brush strokes to get the feel of a field without necessarily painting every blade of grass. And you want it to be fresh and varied in brush stroke, and also value and color. And it's the texture of a field that you're trying to achieve with that.
So Michael, last question. It looks like the cowboy horse and dog are about ready to go on a journey, and the eye leads me to think that they're going to go investigate that valley and mountain valley in the background.
Yes, that was the idea behind the painting and the subject. And then in a landscape like this, you want to create the perception of depth, a 3D depth, on a 2-dimensional surface, on a canvas. And there are things that you get into when you do that. The building itself, there's perspective, where things get smaller as they go back, and that's one of the obvious rules to depth. That these 3 structures, in a sense, really help that happen in their size, and then it leads you into the smaller areas of the field and the mountain. But there are other ways you can create that. You can create it with an atmosphere. We have a blue atmosphere, so things tend to get bluer as they go back in depth. Another area is contrasting value, which is darks and lights. This is the one that is maybe the most complicated, but your difference between your dark and your light as you go back in space can contract. The lights and the darks come closer together. Whereas in the foreground, you have a your widest range of darks and lights. And then finally, with the clouds, you can create space on that ceiling too and make it like a room, and that those clouds are going back too, and they're basically going from large to small as you go back. And you do have to watch that, because in reality, some clouds can be bigger in distance than ones up front, but you've got to be careful that you don't destroy that perspective that you're trying to achieve.
Okay, so Michael, before we shift to as Amy puts up that last painting, I want to ask you some rapid fire questions about the second painting. First of all, do the people that live in the house own that painting? Was one question.
No.
Okay.
I don't go up and knock on somebody's door and bug them to see if I can paint their house and sell them a painting. So
okay, so that was a question. And then another one, 2 questions. What was the most difficult element to paint? And also, how many years does it take to paint a beautiful painting like that? And we have some other questions that I'll start for the other.
Go over those questions again. One at a time.
The most difficult element of painting that house painting?
Yeah, I would say the detail on the house took the most time, if you consider that, and getting everything right on the architecture of that house. It was pretty complicated.
Okay, and then the last one on the last painting, or on the house painting, was how many hours, and this could be any, how many hours does it take to create a beautiful painting?
You know, I would answer that question in the past and say something like, the faster it goes, the better it seems to be as a painting. But these days, that's not true. I'm spending more time these days because I've changed the style and the technique, and I work a painting, layer it more with glazing and thicker paint. So it does take quite a bit of time on these paintings these days, and I only work about 6 hours at a shot on a painting. You know what takes the most time on a painting, though, is thinking. Sitting there, you can spend hours studying your painting, and that's a good sign, and analyzing it and thinking, where do you need to go? What is it missing? What does it need? And that sort of thing. And it's really hard to count how many hours that would add up to.
Okay, and so Hugh, we got some questions in the question box for you to ask.
Michael, this horse is different than the 3 horses in the prior beside the stream. Do you have, and we've seen some other horses, do you have a favorite type of horse that you like to paint?
I love that question because I think I do, but when I paint a horse, I may have a primary subject, and this horse, I painted it a while ago. I can't remember where I got it, if it was at the ranch or not, but this was a beautiful horse. But it being the primary, I might have 2 or 3 or maybe more other horses I might be looking at. And even for the tack or the saddle, and then I will put, a little pack on the behind the saddle there with maybe a slicker or a blanket or something. That's fun to do and play with the color there.
Michael, before we get to the last question that's in the queue, the more I look at this painting, the more I'm drawn to the conversation the cowboy, the dog, and the horse are having. I just find that fascinating the more I look at this. Can you talk about that communication that's going on there?
That's something I've really done on a number of paintings with a horse and a cowboy. And you notice how the cowboy here's got his arm around the horse, and that to me is communicating with the horse there. And then the dog is paying attention to the cowboy and maybe the horse and saying, let's go, I'm ready to go here. And I like that kind of communication. I do in the past, we've done a lot of, I'm a bird hunter, and we work with mostly golden retrievers, but other types of dogs too for different types of birds. And there's a lot of communication going on between the hunter and the dog. And I think that kind of influences me to do that into my painting, work that into my paintings.
So, Michael, the last question that's in the queue, and we'll turn it back to Betsy then, is we've seen a lot of traditional Michael Ewing Western paintings. Are there some paintings out there that you've been contemplating doing that haven't gotten around to that you would like to do?
As a matter of fact, there's one particular subject that I want to do 2 paintings of that I put off way too long. My older brother is a retired Secret Service agent, and he got into he's a history buff and got into the history of the Secret Service. And at one point he asked me if I could do a painting of the White House with Teddy Roosevelt in a carriage and some early Secret Service people dressed in the period with the background of the White House. And he actually did some research for me to get some figures and things like that. I did some more. So, and I want to do it in snow. But when I was working it, I decided, doing sketches in that I would have to do the Teddy Roosevelt as a smaller piece and closer up to the White House. But looking at the White House, and I did, when he was serving at Washington, I did get to the White House, and we got a tour of the West Wing, which you don't often get with him. But backing up and looking at the entire White House in snow, just that building in a snow scene would be a lot of fun to do also.
So Michael, let me ask one last question. I'm sorry, Betsy, but
okay.
When you're doing the composition, there's a lot of things you got to consider. What time of year are you going to paint the subject in, and then what time of day? Can you just briefly talk about some of the issues you might have, taking a subject, and then do I want to paint this at 8 a.m. in the morning, noon, 4 p.m., or midnight?
For me, I found myself liking afternoon light mostly. And maybe because of the courtyards I painted and the light on the flowers for the color, the shadows are really good for me to work with at that time of day. And I just tend to like that. I know a lot of artists like morning and evening light because it's a softer light. And if I were looking for something different to do, a different challenge, I would look at a painting like that. What was the other part of your question there? That was
the issues of painting a midnight version of it, or a 8 p.m. version, or an 8 a.m. version.
That just depends probably on when I'm there. But you know, you can study night scenes and come up what happens at night. There are some famous artists who have worked in with night scenes, and again, I think you're always looking for something new and different to do, and that's why you would go in that direction. And maybe you mentioned the different, I think the different times of year too creates variety. Like I say, getting into snow when we're out here in Arizona, but you know what? People may not like to shovel snow, but they like to look at snow. So snow scenes have sold pretty well out here in Arizona. And springtime is the flowers. And then up at the farm in Michigan, that's where I get a lot of the fall colors. I go up usually in October, and we're hunting up there. But I like to hunt in the snow too. It's a riot to hunt in the snow.
So Betsy, I think that's got all our questions.
There's one other question that came up, and that was, how do you start with a painting like that? Do you have in mind exactly how you want to look, how you want it to look when it's done, or does it evolve somewhat during the process? That was a question from one of our attendees.
Well, it's really coming up with an idea in your head of something you've seen, and you know there's a painting there. And then it comes down to developing a composition for it, and what elements do you want to bring in a figure or not. And then I start out right on the canvas usually. Now, there are some times doing commission work or larger pieces where I'll do pencil sketches to prepare myself for different parts of the painting. But I start on the canvas. A lot of guys start with a charcoal vine and draw it on. That's a great way, and I've done that. But I actually like to start with a loose brush drawing, believe it or not, and then start working down to smaller brushes, more detail, more carefully drawn when you get into the figure or the focal point. So that's the beginning for me. And it's usually on a blue-gray undertone that I start with. I just short of medium value, a little lighter than medium, just to give some color to it. The next level might be blocking in some other colors to work against. So that's the beginning process.